yes, you should score our movie. I thought, well, boy, I should learn something about film scoring. And I came home and I looked at, the TV scheduler and, great movies on. Oh, The Birds. So I set my VCR to record The Birds, and I watched it, always listening for the music. And whenever it would come to the end of a dramatic scene, I'd say, oh, I forgot to listen to the music. And I got to the end of the entire film and thinking, well, I've got to rewind and, study these scenes because I don't remember the music at all. And, of course, I found that there isn't any music in the traditional sense. It's tapes of bird sounds, synthesized bird sounds, and that was just the best lesson, I could have as my first film scoring lesson, was that anything can be a film score.
Working on this principle, Burwell has collaborated closely with sound designer Skip Leavesay, particularly on the Coens' Barton Fink. It's the story of a first-time screenwriter in 1940s Hollywood who finds himself trapped in a psychological nightmare. And director Joel Coen wanted much of that fear and claustrophobia to be carried by Skip Leavesay's sound effects.
Joel originally felt that Barton Fink would have no score. And when I saw the film, I felt there was something to be contributed still.
The result is often subtle interplay between effects and music, such as the recurring motif of the mosquito, which represents Barton's growing sense of torment.
And I say, well, I'm going to do something with like a solo violin that'll echo the idea of the mosquito. There'll just be this held violin note. So we literally, scene by scene, we'd sort of divide up this frequency spectrum. Skip would say, well, I've got the highs, and I'd say, I've got the lows. And then there'd be scenes like this wonderful sort of sound montage, which begins with Barton making love on the bed. So it begins with music playing Barton's theme. Camera pans into the bathroom and then goes down into the sink, and the piano mutates and becomes a prepared piano. I had all these metallic samples of my own that I've tuned to the pitch of the music. In the end, the final result, I can't tell where my stuff, leaves off and Skip begins.
In 2007, Burwell worked on a film with the Coens that forced him to distill his music down even more. The abiding sense of No Country for Old Men is one of menace, a violence which seems to emanate from the empty Texas landscape itself.
One of the things that was really compelling about the edit of the film without music was the dryness. Gave it just this tension that was, it left you uncomfortable all the time, and that seemed to be the pleasure of that film. There's the discomfort. That's where the pleasure is, and in the end, the ultimate, withdrawal from scoring the movie was to hide whatever I did behind Skip Leavesay's sound effects.
Burwell's score may hide behind the effects, but he also enhances them, lending them a more musical quality. Here, the villain is closing in on the protagonist, and Burwell increases the tension with a subtle but disconcerting drone that could almost be the sound of the car itself. And listen out for the bell-like sound that ends the scene. It could be an echo of the action, but it adds a richly ominous note.
I can't imagine there's a more minimal way to score a film. I prefer films with less music. I prefer not being told how to feel or not being told what's going on. I prefer to be a little bit more mystified or discomfited.
Carter Burwell's approach seems remarkably self-effacing, though it's clearly appropriate in many instances. But I don't think a prominent score, one that declares itself, is anything to be ashamed of, given the right director, composer and subject. These are the opening titles of Pi, a psychological thriller that marked the debut of British composer Clint Mansell. The music sets the tone perfectly, driving, utterly modern, yet unpredictable. Pi was also the first film by director Darren Aronofsky. Mansell's subsequent collaborations with him include Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain, and the Oscar-nominated Black Swan.
We've really first bonded over the fact that we didn't like film music anymore. We felt that film music was very much wallpaper. Scores like Pi, had we done those within the studio system, I mean, I've had producers say to me, can you make it more neutral? I'm going, you mean you want the music to do nothing? You just want, and I'd always rather be bold and go, okay, let's sort them, men from the boys here.
Some of Clint Mansell's own boldness must have come from his previous career. Here he is in the band Pop Will Eat Itself, whose forceful sound landed them several chart hits in the 80s and 90s. When the band split, Mansell moved to the US. He'd never composed a film score. In fact, he'd had no formal musical training. Electronic technology made his new career possible.
For me personally, there is no confusion that without computers and without technology, I couldn't do what I do. Even when I was in my band, we never jammed. It just wasn't something we did. I didn't have the musical chops to do that. So for me, the computer just opened up a whole world whereby a simple idea like this that I did for Moon is really not that exciting at this stage. But when you put it to picture and you can add and I play them back, and I've now got this, and suddenly it's a much fuller experience, and I've done it on my own. I mean, it's just the computer has allowed me to sort of track my thoughts, put them together, and suddenly we have a piece of music where nothing existed before. Now, I could have, maybe if I'd gone to music school and learned to write music with, pen and manuscript, I could still do that because that's the way you do that. But, I didn't do that. I played in bands. I know music by ear and whether it sounds good to me or not. And the computer allows me to express that.
To my mind, Clint Mansell's finest work is his score for Requiem for a Dream. Made in 2000 and starring Ellen Burstyn, the film interweaves the doomed lives of 4 drug addicts from Coney Island. Mansell's powerful music not only captures the oppressiveness of the character's predicament, but crucially, its tragedy. That wonderful panning shot across Ellen Burstyn, going at different speeds and things. As soon as you put your piece to that, in effect, was when it became a requiem. That was my feeling, was that until then it had been a story. Now it became a process of grieving for the audience as much as anything else.
It brought such an emotional weight to it, I suppose. Darren says Requiem for a Dream is a horror movie. And every time the addiction wins, that's the monster winning. So that's when we hear the monster's music, I remember the first place we tried it was under the scene where Marion comes out having slept with her psychiatrist, and she's coming down the hallway, and then there's the thunder and lightning. And it was just, we both were just like gobsmacked.
It's a measure of the power of Mansell's score. that it's gone on to have a life beyond the film. This is the trailer for The Two Towers, the second Lord of the Rings movie, released in 2002. Listen to the music. That epic tune binding these spectacular images is actually the theme from Requiem for a Dream, reworked with the kind of full orchestral treatment it would have been given by composers like Max Steiner and Erich Wolfgang Korngold in Hollywood's golden age.
When it was reorchestrated for the Lord of the Rings thing, it actually kind of blew my mind, because it made me see the possibility of music, you know, this the way we'd done it, and then somebody else had done this huge version of it that really, I don't know, you know, people use it on YouTube all the time, just go like, you can put this on anything and it becomes epic, you know. I don't know, it's just been amazing, really.
Clint Mansell strikes me as a shining example of how technology has democratized film scoring, opening it up to talents without conventional backgrounds as composers. But if the history of the film soundtrack tells us anything, it is that cinema has always been open to new storytellers and new kinds of storytelling. Throughout this series, we've seen how great leaps forward in film scoring have been made because studios and producers have been remarkably willing to take risks and trust the judgment of composers. Hollywood welcomed migrants from old Europe, like Korngold and Steiner, giving them the resources to build on the classical tradition and bring a new depth of expressiveness to cinema. It enabled a bold, modern composer like Bernard Herrmann to create scores of unprecedented complexity and psychological depth for the greatest films by the 20th century's finest directors. Producers took a gamble that composers from jazz and pop backgrounds like Ennio Morricone and John Barry could win over a new generation of moviegoers. And they did, bringing fresh energy and excitement to the film soundtrack. And masters of technology like Walter Carlos and Vangelis were encouraged to touch our emotions in new ways with new sounds. That astonishing track record continues to this day, and it leaves me more confident than ever that film composers will continue to innovate and thrive. Film composers don't just come up with a nice tune or memorable hook. What they do is they place their musical abilities entirely at the service of the story. It's the one thing that interests us most as an audience, what's going to happen next. They understand about character, about narrative, about mood. And when they bring their music to those elements of cinema, they create something that was almost unimaginable before the music was there. And here's the big miracle. No matter what their background, their age, or even the style of music they work in, they find exactly the right notes at the right time to speak to every single one of us.